Imagine boarding a flight in first class. You sit in the correct seat. You've paid your way. You're calm, polite professional. But then a flight attendant marches toward you, her voice sharp, her tone laced with quiet judgment. She tells you to move. You refuse because you're right where you belong. And then she slaps you in front of the entire cabin. But what no one realizes is that the woman she slapped was the CEO of the very airline she worked for. Why didn't the CEO retaliate right away? What made her stay silent in that explosive moment? And how could such cruelty happen mid-air, in front of dozens of witnesses? What follows is not just a scandal, it's a reckoning, a journey through shame, power, redemption, and the quiet strength of a woman who chose change over revenge. This isn't just about one flight. It's about what happens when justice doesn't scream but lands with purpose. If you're ready for a story that will move your heart and open your eyes, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Because what you're about to hear might just change the way you see the world. The cabin was filled with the low hum of air vents, polite murmurs, and the occasional clink of a seatbelt fastening. Altair Flight 227 was beginning to board its final passengers at Gate C-17, bound for St. Haven Regional Hub. Business class had already filled up with the usual quiet shuffling of polished shoes and expensive carry-ons. Every motion placing a jacket in the overhead bin, adjusting a neck pillow, was rehearsed and subdued, as if even turbulence might be too vulgar for this crowd. Near the front row, in seat 3A, sat a woman who seemed to exist outside that quiet choreography. She wore a tailored navy dress with subtle gold trim, simple yet elegant. Her skin was a smooth, deep umber, radiant even under the plain sterile LED lighting. Her hair, in soft curls just above her shoulders, framed a face that looked equal parts serene and sharp. She had not spoken since she boarded, offering only a warm smile to the flight attendant who greeted her at the aircraft door. Instead, she sat calmly, flipping through a small leather journal, a gold pen resting between her fingers. Her name was Celeste Vaughn, and no one, especially not the crew, knew who she was. Not yet. As boarding neared completion, Amber Huxley, the lead flight attendant on duty, made her rounds through the business cabin. Her bun was tight, her Navy uniform pressed, and her smile when present was strategic. Amber moved with a calculated efficiency, her eyes scanning each seat, mentally checking for disruptions, potential policy violations, or anyone who just didn't fit. When her gaze landed on Celeste in 3A, her stride slowed. Just for a second. A flicker of suspicion passed across her face, subtle but unmistakable. She continued past without a word. Celeste noticed, but didn't respond. She was used to that look, the one that said, "You don't belong here, but I can't quite figure out how you got in." A few minutes later, Amber returned, this time holding a tray of drinks. She offered champagne to a man in 2B, water to the woman in 3C, then paused before Celeste. "You didn't respond to the pre-departure beverage service," Amber said, not quite smiling. Celeste looked up from her journal and spoke, her voice smooth but quiet. "I'm fine with water, thank you." Amber handed her a plastic cup, not the glass tumbler used for other guests, then turned without comment. The cup was less than half full. Still, Celeste said nothing. She took the cup with a polite nod and returned to her journal. From 2 rows behind, Miles Okoro, a tech entrepreneur traveling to pitch a green energy initiative, noticed the interaction. He blinked, unsure if it was just in his head. He'd seen enough microaggressions to recognize when something subtle wasn't quite right, but like most people in this part of the plane, he stayed silent. The plane taxied. Takeoff was smooth. Seatbelt signs turned off with a melodic chime. Amber returned once again, this time with a hot towel service. She offered one to nearly every passenger except Celeste. That's when Celeste decided to speak. "Excuse me," she said gently, raising her hand. Amber turned, annoyed. "I believe you skipped me for the towel service." Amber's lips tightened. "Oh, I assumed you didn't need one." A silence fell over the surrounding rows. A few heads turned. Celeste paused, her eyes steady. "Let's not make assumptions," she said softly. "Just offer equal service." Amber hesitated, then walked back to the galley without a word. A moment later, she returned no towel, no apology, just a cup of coffee this time. As she reached across Celeste, her hand suddenly jerked. The coffee cup tilted, and hot liquid spilled across Celeste's lap. A sharp gasp erupted from the seats nearby. The heat was immediate, but Celeste didn't cry out. She exhaled, eyes closed for 1 second. Then she opened them again. Amber recoiled, the empty cup still in her hand. "You startled me," she said defensively. "Why are you sitting so close to the edge of the seat?" Celeste looked down at the stain, then back up at Amber. "I haven't moved since boarding," she said calmly. Amber blinked. Her posture shifted to defensiveness, arms crossed. "There's no need to raise your voice." "I haven't raised anything," Celeste replied, her voice like still water. "But you just made a mistake you won't forget." The sentence wasn't angry. It was something else entirely measured, certain, and unsettlingly calm. Amber stepped back. Several passengers looked on, but no one spoke. Even Miles, who had been reaching for the flight attendant call button, hesitated. There was something about Celeste's tone that made him pause. Celeste stood, slowly, gracefully. Her skirt was wet, the fabric clinging to her knees, but she didn't fumble or panic. She reached into the seat pocket, pulled out a packet of tissues, and began dabbing at the coffee. Amber didn't move to help. Jada Silva, the flight manager, arrived moments later, summoned by the silent tension that now gripped rows 1 through 4. She took one look at Celeste's lap, then at Amber's flushed face, and exhaled. "Everything all right here?" she asked. Celeste looked up. "No, but it will be." Jada glanced between them, then down the aisle, at the curious faces peeking over seatbacks. "Let's talk in the galley," she said quickly. Amber opened her mouth to object, but Celeste was already moving quiet, composed, with the poise of someone who had walked through fire before and never let it show. In the galley. Celeste faced both women. "I would like this documented," she said simply. Amber scoffed. "It was an accident." Jada said nothing. She was watching Amber now, really watching. "It wasn't just the coffee," Celeste continued. "It was the assumption, the tone, the disregard. It's a pattern, and I don't accept it." Amber's composure began to crack. "Do you know who I am?" she snapped. Celeste tilted her head slightly. Her eyes were patient but piercing. "No," she said, "but the better question is, do you know who I am?" Amber froze. Jada's breath caught in her throat. For one brief moment, the cramped galley felt cavernous. Then Celeste stepped forward, quiet and resolute. "I'm not here to make a scene, but I won't be erased either." She walked back to her seat, and for the first time since takeoff, the entire cabin seemed to breathe differently. Something had shifted, and the flight was far from over. The hum of the aircraft seemed louder now, as if the plane itself had registered the tension. The incident in business class hadn't been announced, but it had already spread like cabin pressure, equalizing subtly, steadily. A few passengers in coach whispered. A toddler in row 9 peeked between the seats, while his mother gently guided his head back. In seat 5D, Miles Okoro stared ahead, still gripping the armrest he hadn't realized he was clutching since the moment Celeste Vaughn uttered those chilling words. "Do you know who I am?" He hadn't moved. His laptop lay open in front of him, the screen glowing with the mock-up of an eco-energy pitch deck he had been perfecting for weeks. But now it looked empty, irrelevant. His mind kept returning to that flash of coffee, the slow-motion way it spilled across Celeste's skirt, and the bitter look on Amber Huxley's face. Not regretful, not even flustered, just angry that she'd been challenged. Miles had seen this before, though rarely so blatant. He was Korean-Nigerian and raised in Atlanta. Microaggressions were as familiar to him as seatbelt signs and turbulence. But witnessing it like this in the air, in business class, with people watching yet no one moving, made something twist deep in his chest. He replayed it all again. The half-full water cup, the missed hot towel, the way Amber had leaned in, voice dripping with something colder than indifference. Celeste hadn't overreacted. If anything, she had underreacted. Her calm had been almost surgical, and it made Miles feel small for staying silent. He should have said something, pressed his call button, raised a voice. He hadn't. Why? Because the moment passed too fast, because he didn't want to be that passenger, because he still thought someone else would speak first. No, because he was afraid. He hated admitting that. Just then, a rustle caught his attention. Across the aisle, Jada Silva, the flight manager, was making her way back from the galley. She walked slower than usual. Her posture was upright, but her brow was furrowed. Miles watched her pause near 3A. Celeste had changed seats to 3C while her wet cushion dried. She was calmly wiping down her journal with a napkin. Her movements were careful, focused, controlled. Jada bent down and spoke softly. "Ms. Vaughn, I've documented everything. The captain will be informed shortly." Celeste looked up. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes revealed a flicker of weariness. "Thank you, Ms. Silva," she replied. "I appreciate your professionalism." Jada hesitated before walking away. For a moment, it seemed she might say more, but she only nodded and moved on. From his seat, Miles saw the look in Jada's eyes, a quiet struggle, like a woman pulled between duty and conscience. And it wasn't over. Amber returned 5 minutes later, her walk slower now. The edge in her posture had dulled, but not disappeared. She didn't speak to Celeste. She didn't apologize. She only leaned toward another passenger to offer them a refill of juice, carefully avoiding any acknowledgement of what had happened. Miles exhaled sharply. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood. He didn't know what he was going to do yet, only that he couldn't keep doing nothing. Meanwhile, back in row 21, a college student named Nina Patel had been watching, earbuds out, pretending to read. She'd seen the moment Amber slapped Celeste's hand and the subsequent chaos. She was young, opinionated, politically vocal on social media, but now she felt powerless. Why hadn't anyone shouted she thought about recording, but the moment had passed. Then she scrolled Twitter. Nothing yet. Should she be the one to break the story? No. Not yet. Not until she knew the whole truth. Back in business class. Celeste closed her journal and looked out the window. The clouds drifted below, like forgotten pages in the wind. She felt the sting of the coffee more in her mind than on her skin now. The incident hadn't shocked her. What did was how familiar it all felt. She remembered being 10 years old in a small town in Georgia, watching her mother, a nurse, get told to wait in line behind a white woman she'd been called to assist in an emergency. Her mother hadn't flinched. She'd quietly done her job, helped the woman who'd scoffed at her, and walked away. Later, her mother had said, "We don't rise by shouting. We rise by holding steady while the world tries to shake us loose." Celeste had lived by that. But today, it felt heavier than usual. She thought about speaking to Amber again, about explaining what she had endured just to get to a place where she could afford a business-class seat without anyone batting an eye. But why should she explain? Would it even matter just then? Captain Ellis Ward's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We're currently cruising at 38,000 feet. We've been informed of a service issue, and we're looking into it internally. In the meantime, we ask that everyone remain courteous and respectful." There was a pause before he added, "This airline values every passenger, every seat, every story." Celeste closed her eyes. He knew. That meant the next phase was beginning. Amber, meanwhile, had retreated to the rear galley, where she was pacing. Her hands shook slightly. Not from guilt, at least, not yet, but from disbelief. She didn't understand what had gone wrong. She'd been with Altair Airways for almost 8 years. She knew how to handle passengers. She always knew. But that woman, Celeste, had unnerved her. It wasn't the coffee or the comment. It was her calm. The way she didn't rise to the bait. The way she had warned her with such icy clarity. Amber didn't believe she was racist. She had friends who were black. She volunteered for charities. She had even dated a black man once in college. So why had she reacted that way? Because something about Celeste felt like a threat. Amber hated herself for admitting it. And now, the captain was involved. She knew what that meant. In the galley, Jada approached quietly. "Captain Ward will want to see you after service," she said. Amber looked up. "I didn't do anything wrong." Jada didn't respond. "You believe her, don't you?" Amber asked. Jada stared at her. "I saw what happened, and then," she walked away. Back in 3C. Celeste pulled a small pendant from under her dress and ran her thumb along its edge. It was her mother's. Worn, faded, the metal warm against her skin. Her phone buzzed gently with a low battery alert. She ignored it. Miles approached, hesitant. "Ms. Excuse me," he said, softly. "I just wanted to say I saw what happened earlier. I didn't speak up. I should have." Celeste looked at him, not with judgment, just recognition. "I appreciate your honesty," she said. He cleared his throat. "It's not enough, but if there's anything I can do, anything, I'll do it." She studied him a moment. "Start by remembering what silence feels like," she said, "and then teach others how to break it." He nodded slowly, eyes damp. Then he returned to his seat. Celeste turned back toward the window. Outside, the sun had dipped just low enough to set the clouds aglow. Like gold on water, the flight would continue, but something had already changed. The overhead lights dimmed just slightly as the aircraft drifted into its steady cruise. Altair Flight 227 floated quietly above the clouds, but within the cabin, the emotional pressure was anything but light. Conversations in business class were hushed, deliberate. Cutlery tapped porcelain more gently. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was weighted. Celeste Vaughn sat in seat 3C now, legs crossed, her fingers loosely interlaced in her lap. Her journal was closed, her gold pen resting beside it on the tray table. She hadn't written anything since the incident. Words felt too rigid, too inadequate for what she carried. She watched the faint reflection of her face in the dark window beside her. Her posture was poised, her face unreadable, but her mind was far from still. Should I have pushed back harder? Should I have stayed silent? How many more times would dignity feel like a fight rather than a right? Across the aisle, a man cleared his throat loudly, almost nervously, snapping her from her spiral. She glanced at him. His eyes darted away. Was it guilt, embarrassment, or just discomfort being in proximity to confrontation? She didn't blame him. She didn't blame anyone, but she was tired. Tired of being misread, tired of needing proof of her right to be somewhere, tired of giving people the benefit of the doubt when they offered her none in return. The silence around her wasn't new. She'd grown up with it. In classrooms where teachers praised the white girl's questions but skipped over hers. In boardrooms where she was mistaken for the assistant. In first-class lounges where people smiled with politeness but kept their assumptions folded in their coats like forgotten boarding passes. She took a slow breath. Across the plain. Amber Huxley stood rigid in the rear galley, staring at the coffee machine but not making anything. Her mind was a thicket of defense and confusion. She kept asking herself the same question. Why is this happening to me? It wasn't that she believed she was innocent. Deep down, Amber knew the interaction with Celeste hadn't been professional, but she had told herself for years that she was fair. Tough, maybe, but fair. She served hundreds of passengers every week. Never had she been accused of this. And yet, the woman's eyes. Those eyes had unnerved her. Not angry, not pleading, just sure. Amber had always been proud of her instincts. She could spot a difficult passenger by the way they boarded. She could read faces, measure tones. But today, her instincts had failed her. And she didn't know why. She kept replaying the coffee spill, the way Celeste hadn't yelled or cursed. She had spoken with such clarity that it rattled something loose inside Amber. She hated that feeling. Jada Silva entered the galley, clipboard in hand. "We need to finish documenting the cabin report," she said evenly. Amber didn't move. "I don't know what else to say," she muttered. Jada raised an eyebrow. "Try the truth." Amber turned to her. "The truth is, she got under my skin." The way she looked at me like she knew everything, like she was waiting for me to fail. Jada took a breath, slow and measured. Maybe she wasn't waiting for you to fail. Maybe she was waiting for you to see her. Amber's shoulders sank just slightly. "You think I'm racist. I think you let a bias speak louder than your training, and now the captain's involved." Amber bristled. "So that's it. One mistake, and I'm done." Jada didn't answer. Instead, she left the galley, her silence louder than any reprimand. Meanwhile, in row 5, Miles Okoro was still restless. He opened his laptop again, but the screen offered him no comfort. The words of his pitch, "Reimagine the world through clean power," suddenly felt hollow. What's the point of clean energy if we still treat each other like this in the sky? He closed the lid. Then, something unexpected happened. Celeste pressed her call button. The chime was soft, but the effect was immediate. Heads turned subtly. Amber didn't move. Jada saw the light from the galley and came forward. She stopped at Celeste's seat. "Yes, Ms. Vaughn, I'd like to speak with the captain," Celeste said, her tone polite but firm. Jada blinked. "Is there something urgent?" Celeste looked her directly in the eyes. "Yes." Jada hesitated, but nodded. "I'll inform him. He may not be able to leave the cockpit immediately, but I'll let him know." Celeste nodded once and folded her hands again. As Jada disappeared up the aisle, Miles watched in admiration. Celeste didn't speak loudly. She didn't posture. But the way she occupied her space was powerful in itself. He realized then that what rattled people wasn't what she said it was, that she refused to shrink. He stood again and approached slowly. "Ms. Vaughn," he said softly, "I just wanted to say, the way you're handling this, it's incredible." Celeste offered him a soft, tired smile. "Thank you," she said, "but don't admire the restraint. Ask yourself why it's necessary in the first place." He nodded, absorbing her words. Jada returned moments later. "The captain would like to speak with you privately." Celeste stood, collected her journal, and followed her toward the cockpit. As they passed Amber near the jump seat, Amber turned her head sharply, avoiding eye contact. Celeste didn't stop. She didn't need to. In the cockpit galley, Captain Ellis Ward was already waiting. A tall man in his 50s, with a voice like gravel and a posture that commanded authority even when seated. He stood when Celeste entered, extending a hand. "Ms. Vaughn," he said, "I've heard there's been an issue. I'd like to understand directly from you." Celeste shook his hand. Her grip was firm. "I appreciate your time." "Captain," she said, "I'll be brief. I've been on many flights. I've experienced subtle slights and overt dismissals, but today it escalated beyond that. I was denied standard service. My concerns were dismissed. I was physically touched in a manner that was inappropriate and unprofessional." Captain Ward nodded slowly. "Understood, and may I ask, do you wish to file a formal in-flight complaint?" Celeste met his eyes. "I intend to go beyond that, because this is bigger than just one flight." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Celeste reached into her bag and pulled out a slim, embossed leather ID wallet. She opened it and held it up to him. The gold lettering read, "Celeste Vaughn, Chief Executive Officer, Altair Airways." The silence was immediate. Captain Ward stared, blinking once, then again. I didn't realize." "You weren't meant to," Celeste said gently. "I was traveling as any passenger would. That was the point." He looked shaken, but composed. "Ms. Vaughn, I can assure you this will be addressed with the utmost seriousness." "I know it will," she replied, "but not because I'm your CEO. Because no one, no matter what seat, skin tone, or silence, deserves less than basic human dignity." He nodded, his expression grave. "I'll begin a full in-air report," he said. "Would you prefer we remove the crew member upon landing?" "No," Celeste said. "No, I want her to serve the remainder of the flight. I want her to feel what it means to look someone in the eye after misjudging them. That's the only way she'll learn." Captain Ward looked both impressed and unsettled. "Understood." Celeste turned and walked back down the aisle, her spine straight, her steps unhurried. Miles saw her return and felt something in his chest lift, a reminder that integrity doesn't need to shout to be heard. In the rear galley, Amber looked up and saw her coming. She didn't know yet what had changed, but she would. And when she found out who Celeste truly was, it wouldn't be the title that shocked her. It would be the grace. Celeste Vaughn returned to her seat with the same composure she had carried through the galley. From the outside, it seemed as if she'd merely taken a stroll to stretch her legs. There was no announcement, no scene, no outward shift in authority. And yet, something had changed, not in the air, but in the air around her. Amber Huxley remained seated on the jump seat near the rear, her arms folded tightly across her chest, knuckles white where they gripped the fabric of her uniform. She hadn't been summoned yet, but she felt it coming. She could feel the eyes, not just the ones that stared, but the ones that now avoided her. She hated this. She hated how her stomach twisted, hated the sharp awareness that someone she thought of as just another difficult passenger might now hold her entire future in their hands. But what unnerved her most wasn't the fear of consequences. It was the creeping suspicion that maybe she had been wrong. She didn't want to admit that. Not after years of perfect performance evaluations, supervisor praise, promotions, and passenger compliments. She had built a fortress out of perceived fairness and efficiency. And now a single interaction was dismantling it. She whispered under her breath, trying to steady her thoughts. It wasn't about race. It couldn't have been. But the voice inside her wasn't convinced. She kept seeing Celeste's face in her mind. Not angry, not wounded, just still. still in the way a mountain is still, like it's always been there, waiting for time to catch up. Amber looked down at her hands. They were trembling. In the cockpit, Captain Ward completed his log entry with a quiet sigh. He'd flown for over 25 years. He had dealt with emergencies, unruly passengers, engine failures, even an in-air medical situation that nearly ended a man's life. But nothing weighed like this. It wasn't the title that got to him learning Celeste was the CEO of the airline. It was what she chose not to do with that title. She could have had Amber removed, disgraced. Instead, she'd asked for something much harder, that the crew members stay, face the discomfort, finish what she started. Captain Ward didn't agree with every executive decision made by corporate, but in this moment he respected Celeste Vaughn more than any leader he'd ever flown under. He adjusted his headset and prepared to inform the flight staff of the next steps. In row 5, Miles Okoro opened his notebook and scribbled something at the top of a blank page. Neutrality is a choice, and sometimes it chooses the wrong side. He stared at the words for a moment, heart pounding in quiet reflection. He hadn't told Celeste, but he was a writer before he became an entrepreneur. Poetry had been his first language before funding proposals replaced metaphors. But now, here, in the uncomfortable quiet of altitude, something inside him stirred again. He looked up and noticed the woman across the aisle, Celeste, sitting perfectly still, eyes closed, hands relaxed in her lap. Her chest rose and fell with a slow, even rhythm, not asleep, just centered, as if she'd learned, somewhere long ago, how to breathe through every kind of fire. In the rear galley, Jada Silva was on the intercom phone, listening intently. "Yes, sir. Understood," she said, nodding, though no one could see her. When she hung up, she turned to Amber, who now stood awkwardly, trying to fix her bun, though it didn't need fixing. "Captain Ward wants to see you," Jada said quietly. Amber's throat tightened. Now. Amber followed her down the narrow aisle. Passengers subtly leaned away or looked down as she passed, pretending to be absorbed in movies or magazines, but she felt their attention anyway. At the cockpit galley, Jada gestured for her to wait. Amber stood there alone for a full 2 minutes, long enough for self-doubt to fully bloom. Then the door opened. Captain Ward stood inside, face unreadable. "Step in." She obeyed. The door clicked shut behind her. For a moment, there was silence. Then the captain spoke, voice low but resolute. "Do you know who Celeste Vaughn is?" Amber swallowed. "Yes, sir. Now I do. What happened back there was unacceptable," he said, "not just because of her position, because of who we are supposed to be as a crew. You weren't just representing Altair Airways. You were representing decency." Amber looked down. Captain Ward continued, "She asked that you remain on board and finish your service. Do you understand what kind of grace that requires?" Amber nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." He paused, then added, "So, I expect you to serve Miss Vaughn with the respect you would offer any passenger, without tension, without defensiveness, and with full professionalism." Amber didn't answer immediately. Finally, she whispered, "Yes, sir. I will." He studied her for a long moment, dismissed. She stepped out and returned to the main cabin. As she walked past the rows of seats, her heart beat against her chest like it wanted to leave her behind. She reached 3C. Celeste opened her eyes. Amber stood there, spine straight, hands folded. "Miss Vaughn," she said, voice steady but strained. "May I offer you something to drink?" Celeste regarded her for a long second. Then, calmly, she replied, Just water. Thank you. Amber nodded and turned away. She brought back a full glass of cold water, resting it gently on the tray table. No words, just a small bow of the head before stepping back. Celeste picked up the glass, her reflection faint in its surface, and took a sip. It was the same drink, but everything about it had changed. Toward the back of the cabin, Nina Patel was typing quickly on her phone. She wasn't tweeting, not yet. She was journaling, capturing everything: the mood, the silence, the shift in energy. The story was still unfolding, and she wanted to understand it fully before deciding what to share with the world. In 3C, Celeste set the glass down and reached for her pen again. She opened her journal to a blank page and finally began to write. The words came slowly, not as judgment, but as reflection. Sometimes the lesson isn't in who speaks first, it's in who listens last. As she wrote, a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, not because anything was resolved, but because she knew now the reckoning had begun. Not for revenge, but for repair. The cabin lights had dimmed into their cruise mode, casting a soft amber glow over the seats. Trays were cleared, movies resumed, and passengers nestled into their routines. But the calm was misleading. Underneath it, something electric simmered. From row 3 forward, the quiet wasn't comfort, it was compression. A silence too heavy, too structured. The kind of silence people held when unsure whether to confront a truth they had just witnessed or pretend it hadn't happened. Celeste Vaughn sat with her hands folded, eyes watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. Her breathing was deliberate, controlled. She didn't need to look around to feel it: the shift in attention, the carefully averted gazes, the nervous glances from crew members in her direction. She hadn't wanted a spotlight, she wanted respect. But as she had learned too many times before, the two were not the same. Amber Huxley returned to the business cabin with a tray of drinks, her movements more mechanical now. Gone was the polished ease, replaced with a stiffness that betrayed the storm beneath her crisp uniform. Her eyes briefly met Celeste's, then darted away. She continued down the row, offering refills in silence. Jada Silva stood near the galley, watching everything. Her clipboard hung loosely at her side, but she wasn't taking notes. Not right now. She was absorbing something else, something heavier. She had served alongside Amber for years. They weren't friends exactly, but they'd shared long layovers, early morning shifts, and the shared fatigue of dealing with difficult passengers. Amber was efficient, assertive, often respected by the higher-ups. But Jada had also seen the Flash's subtle comments, clipped tones, odd patterns in how she treated some passengers over others. Until today, Jada had chalked it up to personality differences. Now, she wasn't so sure. The intercom crackled once before the voice of Captain Ward emerged, smooth and even as always. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be continuing our cruise at 38,000 feet for another hour and 15 minutes before beginning our descent into St. Haven. We appreciate your cooperation and understanding as we address a minor internal matter. Please remain seated and respectful of the cabin crew's instructions. The message ended, and again, the hush returned. Miles Okoro looked up from his tray table, then turned toward Celeste, who was now leafing slowly through her journal. He wanted to say something again, but this time not just as an apology, as something more, as a participant in whatever this moment was trying to become. He stood, walked quietly down the aisle, and stopped beside her. "Ms. Vaughn," he said gently, "may I sit?" She nodded and motioned toward the empty seat beside her. He sat, not speaking at first. They just sat in silence for several breaths. Finally, he said. "I feel like I've seen 1,000 versions of this moment, but this is the first time I've been close enough to feel how deep it cuts." Celeste tilted her head slightly, listening. "I thought being quiet was the safest choice." He continued, "Now I realize it's the most dangerous." She nodded once, her voice low. "Silence feels neutral until you see who it protects." Miles looked down at his hands. "What you did, how you handled it, it was brave." "No," she replied, "it was necessary." The difference in those two words lingered between them like a held breath. Just then, Amber returned to row 3 with a basket of snacks. Her face was drawn, her hand gripping the metal handle a little too tight. She stopped beside them. "Would either of you care for anything?" she asked, her voice level but lacking warmth. Celeste looked up at her, not with disdain, not with pity, with stillness. "Mr. Okoro," she asked politely. Miles blinked. "No, thank you." Celeste turned back to Amber. "No, thank you," she said gently. Amber nodded. She moved on, but her steps faltered just slightly. In the seat behind them, Nina Patel noticed. She leaned over to her friend and whispered, "She's not breaking, not even a little." Her friend raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "The attendant." "No," Nina said. "Ms. Vaughn." Nina wasn't sure if she admired her or if she felt ashamed by her own passivity. Maybe both. Back at the front galley, Captain Ward stepped out from the cockpit and motioned for Jada. She followed him into the service area, away from passenger ears. "Is she holding together?" he asked quietly. Jada nodded, solid as a rock. "The attendant's trying, but she's unraveling a bit." Ward crossed his arms. "We'll begin descent soon. Ms. Vaughn requested no formal action mid-air, but we need to prepare ground coordination. HR will meet us at the gate." "Understood." He looked toward the cabin, and the rest of them. Jada glanced around the corner. "They're watching, processing, but no one's sleeping through this." Ward gave a tight nod. "Good." He disappeared back into the cockpit. Meanwhile, in row 21, Nina was now typing on her phone. She was no longer journaling. She was drafting a post. "I witnessed a moment today that made me rethink everything I thought I knew about bias, silence, and grace. The woman in row 3C reminded us all what quiet power looks like." She paused. Her fingers hovered. Would it be right to post it? Would it help? Or would it be another moment commodified, another lesson turned into a hashtag? She deleted the post. Instead, she opened a new note and wrote only 3 words. "Don't stay quiet." Celeste turned toward the window again. Outside, dusk had begun its slow descent. The sky stretched in shades of gold and gray, sun dipping under the horizon like a curtain drawn over a heavy day. She pressed her palm lightly to her chest. Her heartbeat was steady now. Amber stood near the front lavatory, eyes closed, back against the wall. She didn't cry. She didn't break. But something was cracking inside her, something she had spent years layering with policy, with rank, with practiced smiles. She had thought she understood professionalism. Today, she realized she had only mastered performance. A quiet voice startled her from her thoughts. "Amber," Jada said gently, "take a breath. We're almost there." Amber nodded, but she wasn't sure she'd be the same person when they landed. The soft chime echoed through the cabin. A signal. They were beginning their descent into St. Haven. Passengers stirred in their seats, stretching limbs and blinking at half-watched movies. Tray tables snapped shut, windows lifted. The atmosphere shifted. A subtle alertness swept through the aircraft, not just from the altitude change, but from something deeper. The knowledge that what had begun in the air could no longer be left behind once they landed. Celeste Vaughn remained still in seat 3C, her posture as composed as it had been since boarding. Her hands rested atop her closed journal. The pen lay untouched. She wasn't writing anymore. She was remembering. She thought of her father, who had worked ground crew for almost 2 decades and had been passed over for promotion 6 times, once by a man he'd trained. She thought of her mother's calm defiance, the strength with which she wore her nurse's scrubs even when patients mistook her for the janitor. And she thought of the long, lonely climb it had taken to sit where she did now, not in business class, but in the C-suite. It had never been about proving she was good enough. It had been about surviving in a world that pretended not to see her. She felt the soft pitch of the plane adjusting. Her ears popped gently. Amber Huxley stood in the forward galley, arms folded tight against her chest. Her uniform remained crisp, but her thoughts unraveled. She kept rehearsing the words. Apology, explanation, denial. She'd always considered herself efficient, composed, a woman of standards. But the incident with Celeste had cracked through that veneer. She saw now, in bits and flashes, how her behavior had unfolded, not just the coffee, the condescension in her tone, the way she questioned the passenger's status, the way she slapped a hand without thought. She had judged her, and worse. She'd assumed the judgment was justified. She didn't know what awaited her once they landed, but her pride no longer mattered as much as something she hadn't felt in years. Shame. Jada Silva stood near the service phone, listening as Captain Ward gave final landing instructions. Her fingers twitched near her hip. She had been a flight manager for 8 years, but this flight had shifted something in her. Watching Celeste handle humiliation with such control had pulled something raw to the surface. She'd seen injustice before, tiny things. The way some crew members rolled their eyes at elderly passengers who needed help. The quiet sighs when mothers with crying babies boarded. The occasional flicker of bias when passengers with names that sounded foreign requested service. But what made this different was how clearly she had seen it, how undeniably wrong it had been, and how alone Celeste had seemed through it all. Jada didn't want to be one of the people who looked away anymore. In coach, Nina Patel clutched her phone. She wasn't scrolling. She was writing. Not for social media this time. It was for her university paper, a personal reflection for her journalism ethics class. Today, I saw the cost of silence. I saw grace in the face of something cruel. And I realized that just watching isn't the same as witnessing. Witnessing carries weight. She stopped, looked up. She watched Celeste again. How still she was. There was power in that stillness. It wasn't passivity. It was presence. And it made Nina want to do more than just record moments. It made her want to shape them. In the row across from Celeste, Miles Okoro had his seat upright, but his thoughts lay in spirals. He kept seeing her face the quiet resolve, the way she didn't demand recognition, and yet commanded it. He thought of his mother, who had worked night shifts at an urgent care center, too proud to complain when co-workers skipped over her for lunch breaks. He thought of the micro-cuts his sister endured in law school, comments on her hair, her tone, her attitude. He had told himself they were just the cost of excellence. But watching Celeste, he realized how much was stolen in the name of politeness, how often dignity was taxed with interest. He turned, hoping to speak again, but something stopped him. Not fear, respect. Celeste didn't need comforting. She needed truth. The seatbelt light pinged on. Amber stepped forward to make the announcement. Her voice cracked slightly as she began. Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for landing in St. Haven. Please ensure your tray tables are stowed, seat backs are upright, and seat belts securely fastened. Flight attendants will make a final pass through the cabin. She stepped back from the intercom. Her heart thundered. She took a deep breath, turned, and made her way toward row 3. When she reached Celeste's seat, she stopped. Celeste looked up. Their eyes met. Amber hesitated. Then she knelt beside her seat, just low enough to speak quietly, to make herself small for once. "I know it's not enough," Amber began, voice low, "but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry for how I spoke to you, for how I treated you, for making you carry the weight of something that was mine to hold." Celeste didn't speak immediately. Then, softly, she replied, "Do you know what you assumed about me when I boarded?" Amber's throat tightened. "I think I do now, and why did you assume it, I don't know," Amber said honestly. "But I think I've been trained to see certain people a certain way, even if no one says it out loud." Celeste nodded slowly. "That's the part we need to unlearn," Amber whispered. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say it out loud." Celeste met her gaze. "I respect that you did." Amber rose and walked back toward the galley. Her hands shook slightly, but her eyes were clearer than they had been the entire flight. Jada met her halfway and said nothing, only gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Celeste turned her head to the window. The city lights of St. Haven twinkled below. Ribbons of gold and white spread like nerves through the dark. She felt the plane begin its final descent. In just a few minutes, they would land. Phones would buzz. Overhead bins would creak open. Everyone would move on. But she knew this wouldn't end here, because real change never does. It just lands softly, like a plane in the dark, unnoticed by most, but undeniable to those who were awake when it happened. The wheels touched down with a muted thud, followed by the familiar screech of brakes and a soft lurch forward as Altair Flight 227 rolled onto the tarmac at St. Haven Regional. A few scattered claps broke out, more out of habit than gratitude, but the applause quickly faded as reality reasserted itself. It wasn't just a landing, it was an arrival. Celeste Vaughn kept her seatbelt fastened and her body still, her gaze fixed outside the window, where rain traced quiet rivers down the plexiglass. The sky was the color of steel, the airport lights reflecting off puddles on the tarmac like fractured stars. As the plane slowed near the gate, the cabin filled with rustling movement, passengers stretching, unlocking phones, reaching for overhead bags. But something in the energy was subdued. No one in row 3 rushed to stand. Not a single person in business class looked at Celeste directly, though many stole glances when they thought she wouldn't notice. She noticed, and yet she gave them nothing to feel guilty about. No stares, no judgment, just silence, the kind that speaks volumes. Behind the curtain, Amber Huxley stood at her station. She was going through the final checklist mechanically, but her mind wasn't on the paperwork. She knew the moment she stepped off the plane, her uniform might no longer mean what it did when she boarded. She had apologized, yes, but sometimes an apology was the beginning of something, not the end. She breathed slowly, her name badge suddenly feeling heavier than her luggage. Captain Ward's voice crackled through the intercom one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to St. Haven. For those with connecting flights, please check the monitors in the terminal. We appreciate your cooperation today. Please remain seated until the aircraft has reached the gate and the seatbelt sign is turned off. On behalf of Altair Airways and the entire crew, thank you." Jada Silva stood in the front of the cabin, back straight, hands loosely clasped in front of her. Her face was composed, but her eyes were scanning for the airport staff she knew would be waiting beyond the gate. She saw them as soon as the door opened, a man in a gray Altair blazer and a woman with a sleek black tablet, both waiting just outside the jet bridge with guarded expressions and lanyards flashing red HR credentials. No matter how quiet the landing, Something had landed harder than wheels. Passengers began to disembark. One by one, they stepped into the aisle, careful not to bump anyone. Some muttered quick goodbyes. Others remained awkwardly silent. In row 5, Miles Okoro hesitated. Then he turned and leaned slightly over toward Celeste. "I hope you know what you did today changed more than just a few minds." Celeste gave him a small, warm nod. "What matters is what you do with it after we land." Miles smiled. "I will." He stepped into the aisle, retrieved his bag, and walked toward the exit, where he passed Amber. He didn't say anything, but he looked her in the eyes. Not with hatred, but with something closer to invitation. She wasn't sure she deserved it. Back in coach, Nina Patel clutched her phone and her tote bag. As she passed row 3, she looked directly at Celeste and paused. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking. Celeste nodded again, gently. "Take it with you." Nina smiled and moved on, her cheeks flushed. Eventually, the aisle cleared, leaving only the remaining crew, the ground staff just beyond the open cabin door, and Celeste Vaughn still seated, calm, waiting. Jada approached her. "Ms. Vaughn," she said carefully, "would you like to disembark privately?" Celeste looked up. "No." "I'm not hiding." Jada hesitated, then nodded with quiet respect. Amber stood frozen near the galley. Celeste walked forward with her carry-on in one hand, her journal tucked under her arm. She stopped beside Amber, who flinched slightly at the proximity. Celeste didn't lower her voice. "You were wrong." Amber nodded slowly. "I know." Celeste didn't say more. She walked past her, chin level, shoulders back, and stepped into the jet bridge. The 2 HR staff greeted her with professional but tense expressions. "Ms. Vaughn, we're here at your request. Would you like to speak with us now, or schedule something off-site?" the woman asked. Celeste glanced behind her into the plane. "Make sure she gets home safely," she said, "and that someone talks to her, not just about protocol, but about perception." The man blinked. "So, you're not pressing a formal charge?" "Not today," Celeste replied, "but don't mistake restraint for lack of memory." With that, she turned and disappeared into the terminal, her heels soft against the carpeted floor. Behind her, Amber exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She sat down on the edge of the galley jump seat, elbows on her knees, head in her hands. She had expected fury, retaliation. Instead, she'd received something far more difficult to live with. Mercy. In the terminal. Celeste walked past the bustling crowds, her gate pass still clipped to her jacket. No one looked twice. No one recognized her. Just another traveler with purpose. She stopped at a window overlooking the tarmac, watching as her plane was towed to its next gate. From this distance, it looked just like any other jet. Identical design, standard paint. Nothing on the outside marked it as the site of a confrontation that had quietly shaken an entire cabin into self-reflection. She touched her journal once more. She didn't open it. Not yet. There would be time to write, to process, to speak again when ready. But for now, she stood in the stillness of arrival, and behind her, far above, Flight 227 faded into the crowded sky like a secret someone had finally decided to tell. The Altair corporate tower in St. Mahaven rose in sleek silver arcs, catching the late morning sun in brilliant streaks of gold and blue. The lobby hummed with soft jazz and the muted voices of staff moving quickly, quietly. The building had been designed to reflect power without arrogance. Clean lines, open spaces, transparent glass. That was no accident. Transparency had been Celeste Vaughn's first priority when she was appointed CEO, and today It was the one thing she wasn't willing to sacrifice. Inside the 29th floor conference room, 3 department heads from Human Resources, 2 from Legal, and 1 senior VP of Flight Operations sat at the long, polished table. Coffee cups steamed in front of them, untouched. Files were stacked in neat piles. On the monitor, a paused security clip from the jet bridge sat frozen on a black screen. When Celeste entered, the room stood. She didn't motion for them to sit. Instead, she walked to the head of the table and set her leather-bound journal down with care. Let's begin. The first to speak was Linda Charters, VP of HR. Her voice was gentle but clear. Ms. Vaughn, we've completed our initial review of the incident. We have statements from multiple passengers, crew logs, onboard video before and after the incident, and your own written account. And Amber Huxley Celeste asked. She's been placed on administrative leave pending formal action, Linda replied. She has requested a formal mediation should you wish to pursue disciplinary or legal measures. Celeste didn't answer immediately. She turned and looked out the window, where a plane taxied into view, tiny against the skyline. How many complaints have we received about Amber prior to this? A pause. None formal, Linda said. But there are 2 flagged comments in past employee feedback forms, both describing her behavior as dismissive and curt, especially toward non-white passengers. Celeste nodded slightly, still looking out. And what have we done about that? Linda glanced down. We noted them. There was a general bias training offered last year. Attendance was optional. Celeste turned back. Her voice didn't rise, but it tightened. I don't want optional anymore. The room fell silent. She walked toward the monitor and clicked play. The frozen screen flickered to life Amber's figure, the posture of her hand, the exact moment the slap was raised, muffled audio, passengers gasping, Celeste's own calm response, her refusal to escalate. She paused it again. I don't need an apology, Celeste said. I don't need punishment either. Murmurs of confusion. What I need is a culture shift, not performative, not another email blast. Real work, real investment. She scanned the room. Bias isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in who we overlook, who we dismiss, who we never imagine could be more powerful than us. She pointed to the paused image on screen. This wasn't about me being CEO. It was about the assumption that I couldn't be. And that assumption lives in this building, too. The legal team shifted uncomfortably. Should we? One of them started. Celeste held up a hand. I want a company-wide review of all in-flight crew behavior and incident reports for the past 2 years. I want a third-party audit of promotion and hiring patterns. And I want a passenger equity feedback system, not just stars and surveys, but narrative space where people can describe how they felt, not just what they bought. Linda blinked. You're proposing systemic overhaul? I'm not proposing it, Celeste said. I'm doing it. I live the cost of inaction in full view of 144 passengers. Now the company will too. She closed her journal. Meeting adjourned. As she walked out, silence held in her wake not of fear, but of realization. That a new chapter was being written, and it would not be penned in excuses. Downstairs, in a small cafe off the main lobby, Amber Huxley sat at a corner table nursing a lukewarm coffee. Her Altair badge still hung from her neck, but she no longer wore it with pride. Jada Silva approached quietly, her blazer still creased from morning transit. She sat without asking. You look like hell, Jada said softly. Amber gave a bitter smile. You always did know how to break the ice. They sat for a moment, neither speaking. Finally, Amber said, she could have destroyed me, fired me on the spot, pressed charges, dragged me online. Jada nodded. She still could. I don't understand why she didn't. Jada looked at her. Because mercy is a form of power most people never learn to wield. Amber wiped at her eyes. I didn't mean to. I didn't think I was. Her voice cracked. I thought I was fair. You were. Jada said, fair to people you respected, not to everyone. Amber closed her eyes. What do I do now? Jada didn't offer advice. She simply placed a small folded piece of paper on the table. Amber unfolded it. It was a list of books, programs, and one name circled in bold: Dr. Eliza Monroe, equity consultant. This is what I'm doing, Jada said. You can join, or not. But don't sit here waiting for absolution. You won't heal in limbo. Amber stared at the list, then nodded once. Across town, Celeste stepped into a modest brick building tucked between a daycare and a bakery. No press, no cameras, just a simple sign on the door that read, Altair Foundation, Community Partnerships Office. Inside, she met with 2 interns preparing the launch of a new initiative. We're calling it Open Sky, one of them explained. The idea is to train at-risk youth for careers in aviation, not just pilots, but engineers, flight staff, mechanics. Celeste smiled. And how are we funding it? The other intern grinned. You already did. Celeste nodded and placed her journal on the table. Then let's fly. That night. As she returned to her apartment, Celeste finally opened her journal again. She wrote in long, slow strokes. There are 2 kinds of turbulence, what shakes the plane and what shakes the world below it. One is expected. The other, if handled right, becomes a flight path for change. She closed the journal. Outside her window, a jet soared overhead, and this time, she didn't just see a plane. She saw possibility. The incident had barely been a whisper at first, a tweet from a passenger, then a blurry cell phone video posted by Nina Patel. It didn't even show the slap itself, just the aftermath, a poised black woman in business class, a pale flight attendant retreating, a passenger murmuring, "Did she just," in the background. That was enough. By morning, the video had more than 300,000 views. By noon, 1 million. The hashtags came fast. Mega Sky Bias, Seat 3C, Flying While Black, and then the one that hit hardest, She Owns the Airline. The media scramble followed. Bloggers, reporters, cable anchors all searching for a name, a face, an explanation. The story spread not because of the slap, but because of what people saw in Celeste's restraint, in her silence, in her control. People weren't just outraged. They were moved. Celeste Vaughn didn't speak to the press. She declined interviews. No statements, no tweets, nothing from her official office at Altair, but everywhere she didn't speak, others did. Passengers from Flight 227 began writing their accounts. Miles Okoro's post on LinkedIn went viral. I saw leadership today in the form of stillness, a woman humiliated in public who chose not revenge, but recalibration. If you think silence is weakness, you've never met Celeste Vaughn. Nina wrote a blog titled The Woman in Row 3C that was picked up by national outlets. She described the moment not as spectacle, but as a collision between bias and quiet authority. Celeste read none of it. She had been here before, caught in storms of media attention, not for her victories, but for how she endured injustice. She didn't want to be a symbol. She wanted systems to change. That afternoon, she sat alone in the glass-walled boardroom of Altair's central office. She reviewed the updated data from HR retention rates, complaints by demographic, promotion stats across gender and race. She read slowly, methodically, making notes in the margins of her journal. Outside the boardroom, a soft knock interrupted. It was Linda Charters, looking unsure for once. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "He's from the Department of Transportation, Federal Oversight." Celeste raised an eyebrow. That was fast. Linda smiled faintly. Apparently, Washington reads hashtags. She nodded. Send him in. A tall black man in a charcoal suit entered, clean-cut, professional, but his eyes held something different, a quiet reverence. Ms. Vaughn, he said, I'm Marcus Diallo. I've been assigned to oversee the independent audit of your flight operations and corporate culture procedures. But off the record. He paused. I've followed your career since you were COO at Polaris Jet. I've seen what you've built and what you've withstood. Celeste gestured toward a chair. I've got nothing to hide. Mr. Diallo, run your audit. He smiled. With your permission, I'd also like to use your company's Open Sky program as a potential national model for equity pipelines in aviation. Celeste blinked. He continued, not just for PR, for policy, for replication across state-run carriers and public-private partnerships. You've got the blueprint. We just need to scale it. She leaned back, thoughtful. I didn't ask to be the face of a movement, she said softly. I know, he replied. But you've already become one. She stared out the window again, where the airport runways formed clean lines into the distance. Then let's make sure it leads somewhere. Back in her apartment that evening, Celeste poured herself a glass of chamomile tea and sat by the window. The skyline pulsed with city life cars streaming like rivers of light, planes rising like silver birds in the dusk. She opened her laptop and saw the video had reached 5 million views. The comments ranged from furious to inspired. Stories poured in, people sharing their own experiences, airport indignities, misjudged moments, small wounds that had never healed. Celeste scrolled through slowly. She knew these stories intimately. Some were her own. One caught her attention. It was from a former Altair employee, an older woman named Deborah, who had retired 5 years earlier. I cleaned cabins for 28 years. People assumed I didn't speak English, that I was invisible. One day, a young woman in a navy pantsuit spoke to me by name, said thank you, asked if I had everything I needed to finish my shift. That woman was Celeste Vaughn. I never forgot that. Celeste sat back, her throat tightening. That wasn't a memory she even recalled. It had just been kindness, simple, human. But to someone, it had meant everything. Meanwhile, at a quiet corner of St. Haven's Public Library, Amber Huxley sat in front of an open laptop. No makeup, no badge, no uniform, just a notepad full of scribbles and a tired look in her eyes. She'd been reading, listening, watching, not for defense, but for understanding. She kept a single tab open on her screen, how to identify implicit racial bias in customer service settings. Each sentence stung. Each one sounded a little too familiar. She jotted down a question in her notebook. What was I protecting when I reacted that way? She didn't have the answer yet, but she was done pretending there wasn't one. Outside, the evening news played on a cafe TV. A reporter stood in front of Altair headquarters, and while Altair Airways has yet to issue a formal corporate statement, sources inside the company confirm that sweeping internal reviews and new anti-bias protocols are being developed under direct guidance from CEO Celeste Vaughn. What began as a single passenger confrontation has now triggered a nationwide discussion on racial profiling in the skies. A nearby customer shook their head. She should have sued them. Their companion replied, she didn't need to. She's changing the whole system instead. Inside the cafe, Nina Patel sipped an iced tea, earbuds in, listening to her professor's voice on a recorded lecture. Media ethics isn't just about reporting truth. It's about which truths you choose to report. It's about how silence is framed as neutrality when it's really complicity. Nina looked out the window at a passing plane overhead. This story wasn't done. It was just climbing altitude in a quiet room lit by warm lamps. Celeste made one last note in her journal before turning in for the night. Leadership is not the act of being seen. It's the choice to see others clearly, even when they refuse to see you. She closed the book. Tomorrow, there would be more interviews, more meetings, more resistance, but for now, she rested. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, then it waits. The Altair Executive Lounge at St. Haven was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that buzzed just beneath polished surfaces and forced smiles. No announcements, no music, just the occasional rustle of newspapers and the clink of ceramic cups against saucers. Celeste Vaughn sat near the window, her tablet in one hand, a half-drunk espresso beside her. Outside, a rain-slicked runway shimmered under gray skies. Planes taxied in silence. Even they seemed to tread more carefully now. She had just wrapped a call with the board of directors, half of whom had expressed full support, while the other half murmured corporate platitudes about optics and brand sustainability. She knew the language, knew how easily empathy could be repackaged as strategy. But she wasn't here for appearances. She was here for substance. She closed her tablet and reached for her journal, flipping to a blank page. Before she could begin writing, a voice interrupted. Ms. Vaughn. She looked up. It was Miles Okoro. Again, he looked sheepish, holding a coffee cup with two hands like a student about to ask for advice. His backpack was slung over one shoulder. I hope I'm not intruding, he said. Not at all, Celeste replied with a small nod. He sat slowly, as if unsure if the invitation was real. I saw your name in the news, he said. But I think I understood who you were long before I ever Googled you. Celeste arched an eyebrow. Is that so? He nodded. I used to think leadership meant being the loudest voice in the room, the one making the big decisions. But after that flight, watching how you held your ground, not with noise, but with clarity, it changed something in me. Celeste studied him for a moment. There was no flattery in his voice, only honesty. And what will you do with that change? She asked. Miles hesitated. That's why I'm here. I want to help. Not for credit. Just... I feel like staying silent on that flight made me part of the problem. She didn't respond right away. Then she leaned forward. Then use your voice differently next time. Not louder. Smarter. Use it when it matters. Miles nodded, understanding. Yes, ma'am. He stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. You weren't alone on that plane. Not entirely. Just so you know. Celeste gave him the faintest smile. Thank you. Miles. When he left, she felt something loosen in her chest. Later that day, she was scheduled to appear privately at a town hall meeting with flight crews from across Altair's operations. It was an unprecedented gathering, voluntary, off-record, no cameras, just her and the people who kept her airline running, many of whom hadn't known her name before last week. The event was held in a converted maintenance hangar. Metal folding chairs replaced loading carts. The usual scent of jet fuel was masked by air purifiers and brewing coffee. Over 100 employees filled the space pilots, stewards, mechanics, gate agents, even janitorial staff. Celeste entered from the back. No grand entrance, no announcement. She walked up the aisle like anyone else, her heels echoing faintly against the floor. When she reached the front, she didn't stand behind the podium. She stood beside it. No script, no notes. Thank you for coming. She began. Her voice was calm. Even. You all know what happened on Flight 227. Some of you have seen the video. Some of you were shocked. Others, I suspect, were not. The room was silent. I'm not here to relive what happened. I'm here because what happened on that plane doesn't stay on that plane. It travels. It lands with us everywhere we go, in every boarding line, every meal tray, every gate delay. She looked around the room, meeting eyes. I've walked through airports where no one looked twice, and others where I was followed, searched, or questioned. I've sat in cockpits with male pilots who assumed I was the new head of catering. I've chaired meetings where someone asked me to refill their water, mistaking me for an assistant. A few murmurs, a few lowered gazes. This isn't about a single slap. It's about a culture that makes that slap possible, justifiable, forgettable. She let that settle, and I'm here to say it stops now. Somewhere in the back, a woman stood, older, flight attendant, maybe in her 60s, short white hair and sharp eyes. Ms.
Vaughn, she said, I've been in this industry for 40 years. I've seen racism. I've seen sexism. I've seen ageism. But I've never seen someone in your position say that out loud. Not here. Celeste nodded. Then, it's long overdue. Another voice chimed in. A young baggage handler, barely out of his teens. What do we do if the next Amber Huxley doesn't get caught? Celeste's eyes didn't flinch. You call them in, not just out. You speak up. You intervene. You protect passengers the way you'd want someone to protect your mother, your sister, your friend. And when the system punishes you for that, she paused. You send them to me. Applause began slowly, tentative at first, then swelling until the hangar echoed with it. Afterward, Celeste didn't retreat to her car. She stayed. She shook hands. She listened. She answered questions. And by the time she finally left, the crowd wasn't just inspired, they were ready. Back in her office, a package sat on her desk. No name, just a return address from a suburb outside of St. Haven. She opened it to find a small box, a handwritten note on top. For what you carry, for what you chose not to return. Inside was a single white glove, clean, pressed, symbolic. Celeste stared at it for a long moment. Then she placed it inside her desk drawer, quietly, reverently. Some symbols didn't need to be displayed. They just needed to be understood. A week later, Celeste Vaughn entered the neutral-toned mediation room with the kind of calm only years of navigating chaos could teach. The long rectangular table gleamed under LED lights, its surface bare except for a box of tissues in the center and a carafe of lukewarm water on the edge. Amber Huxley was already seated. She looked smaller without her uniform. Her posture was tight, but not defensive, more like someone bracing for weather they could no longer predict. She wore a navy blouse and black slacks, her hair pulled back neatly. Her eyes flicked toward Celeste, then away. Also present were Linda Charters, the VP of HR, and an outside mediator, Marianne Keller, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with horn-rimmed glasses and a decades-long reputation for cutting through corporate fluff. Celeste sat, carefully adjusting the hem of her blazer before folding her hands on the table. She said nothing. Marianne began. This is an internal grievance review requested by Miss Huxley to address the events on Flight 227. The goal of this meeting is not punishment, but truth, context, and closure. Is that understood? Both women nodded. Amber cleared her throat. Her voice trembled slightly. I asked for this because I needed to look you in the eye, she began, and say I'm sorry. Not for the sake of keeping my job, not for PR. Just because I was wrong. I was so wrong. Celeste didn't react. She let the silence breathe. Amber continued. I saw a woman in seat 3C and made 100 assumptions in 3 seconds. And when I was challenged, I didn't just double down. I lashed out. That moment, that slap, it wasn't about you. It was about me trying to protect something I didn't even understand. Celeste's voice was steady when she finally spoke. And what was that? Amber hesitated, then said softly, "Control. My sense of order. My fear of being undermined. And maybe, underneath it all, my belief that someone who looked like you couldn't possibly have more power than someone who looked like me." The room was so quiet, the hum of the air conditioning sounded like static. Marianne looked to Celeste. "Do you wish to respond?" Celeste leaned forward slightly. "I've been slapped by worse than your hand," she said. "I've been slapped by policies, by silence, by rooms that shut their doors the moment I walked in." Amber's face crumpled, but she didn't look away. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she whispered. Celeste shook her head slowly. "Forgiveness isn't the question." She paused, then added, "The real question is, what will you do with your guilt?" Amber blinked. Celeste continued, "You can bury it in shame, or you can let it become fuel for unlearning, for advocacy, for stopping the next version of you from doing the same thing to someone else." Amber wiped at her eyes with the sleeve of her blouse. "I want to learn," she said. "I don't want this to be the end of my story." Marianne made a note. Linda cleared her throat. "Ms. Vaughn, while your comments are not required to shape our decision, your perspective does carry weight. Do you have a recommendation?" Celeste didn't hesitate. "I don't want her fired, not if she's willing to rebuild from the ground up, but she cannot return to flight status until she's completed a full bias rehabilitation program, conducted mentoring sessions with junior crew, and publicly addresses this not as punishment, but as a pledge." Amber's mouth fell slightly open. You'd give me that chance." Celeste met her eyes. "No one gave me chances. I carved them out of stone. Now I pass the chisel to you." Amber nodded, tears spilling freely now. After the session, Celeste stepped out into the courtyard behind the Altair building. It was quiet there, just low hedges, stone benches, and the distant rumble of aircraft coming and going. The air smelled like new rain and jet fuel. A strange blend, familiar. She sat, flipping open her journal. She wrote, "The people who hurt you are not always monsters. Sometimes they are mirrors cracked, yes, but still capable of reflecting truth if they're willing to look. Growth begins when shame no longer feels like armor, but like weight we're finally willing to put down." She closed the journal and let the sunlight touch her face. Behind her, Linda appeared quietly. "Celeste," she said, "that was one of the most generous things I've ever seen in a mediation." "It wasn't generosity," Celeste replied. "It was strategy. Shame doesn't heal anyone, but responsibility, that's transformative." Linda nodded. "There's something else," she added. "You've been invited to speak at the Global Aviation Equity Summit next month. Keynote. They want you to talk about what happened, about leadership under fire." Celeste didn't answer right away. Then, "Send me the details. I'll think about it." That evening, Amber sat alone in her studio apartment. A single lamp glowed beside her. Her Altair badge rested on the table. She looked at it like it was a relic from a past life. In many ways, it was. She opened her laptop and typed a new document. Statement of Accountability. Draft 1. She stared at the blinking cursor. Her fingers hovered. Then she began. "My name is Amber Huxley, and I have work to do." Across the city, in a tiny bookstore that had long since closed for the evening, Nina Patel organized a community event flyer. At the top, in bold letters, "Racial Bias in Everyday Spaces," a conversation series. She didn't list any sponsors, no universities,
just her own name, inspired by one passenger, one flight, one seat, back in her home. Celeste lit a single candle and settled into her favorite armchair. She looked out at the skyline, at the glowing runways in the distance. Then she picked up her journal again and wrote one more line before bed. Justice isn't always loud, but when it lands, it echoes. The ballroom at the Global Aviation Equity Summit pulsed with quiet anticipation. The stage was framed by tall navy curtains, and the backdrop behind the podium bore a simple image, a jet ascending into open sky. Rows of attendees filled the room, executives in tailored suits, pilots in crisp uniforms, flight attendants in company blazers, and young trainees with notepads balanced on their laps. There were journalists, academics, policy advisors, and advocates for justice seated side by side, all waiting at exactly 10 a.m. Celeste Vaughn walked onto the stage. No intro music, no voiceover announcement, just the echo of her heels on hardwood and a breathless hush that settled across the crowd. She stood behind the podium for a moment, saying nothing. Then she closed the folder she had carried with her, placed it on the table beside her, and looked up. I was not supposed to be here. Her voice was calm but filled the room. I don't mean this conference. I mean this industry, this position, this stage. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Celeste continued. There were no mentors for me when I started, no leaders who looked like me in airline boardrooms, no stories like mine in aviation textbooks. When I boarded planes, I was told I was in the wrong seat. When I tried to lead, I was told I was in the wrong place. She let the silence stretch. And when I was slapped on Flight 227, I was told by implication that I was in the wrong body. A hush, deeper than silence, followed. But I didn't come here to relive that moment. I came to tell you what happened next. She paused, then stepped away from the podium, walking slowly across the stage. I saw passengers speak up. I saw staff members question the culture they were trained in. I saw young people like Nina Patel start projects to reimagine what equity can look like in real time. I saw even the person who harmed me, Amber Huxley, begin the long, painful, essential work of unlearning what she thought she knew. Somewhere in the back, Amber sat with her shoulders straight, her badge clipped to a modest gray blouse. She didn't hide, she didn't flinch. And I've seen companies, our company, begin to recognize that justice is not a program or a poster. It's a practice. Daily. Uncomfortable. Necessary. Celeste looked out over the audience. You want to know what equity in aviation looks like? It looks like training that doesn't stop after hiring. It looks like leadership that listens, not just instructs. It looks like crew members defending passengers, even when it's awkward, even when it's risky. A young man near the front stood quietly. It was Miles Okoro. He gave a small nod. It looks like this room, Celeste added, filled with people who no longer pretend they haven't seen what they've seen. A beat passed. Equity is not the destination. It is the sky we agree to fly through, together, without pretending turbulence isn't real. Applause began softly, then grew. Not the usual conference clapping, but something steadier, fuller earned. When it faded, Celeste returned to the podium. I'll leave you with this, she said. There's a quote from a pilot I trained with years ago. He used to say, the sky remembers everything. Every course correction, every misstep, every act of grace. The sky holds it all. She let that settle. So, let's give it something worth remembering. The applause was thunderous. After the speech, she didn't return to the green room. She stayed in the crowd. She shook hands, hugged former employees, answered questions from students and interns. She met with union reps, with pilots, with engineers. She stayed until the lights dimmed. Outside the convention center, The sky was wide and cloudless. Celeste walked alone to the car, waiting for her, but she stopped before reaching it. Across the street, a group of young flight attendant trainees in matching navy blazers were watching her from the sidewalk. One of them stepped forward, her hand trembling slightly. "Ms. Vaughn," she said, "can I just say, thank you. You make us feel like maybe we do belong here." Celeste smiled. "A real one. You already do," she said. Back in her apartment that night, Celeste brewed tea and sat beside her window, watching the city lights blink into night. She pulled out her journal, now nearly full, and opened to the final page. She hesitated, then began to write. Change doesn't begin when power shifts hands. It begins when power shifts hearts. She closed the journal gently and exhaled. On the other side of town, Amber Huxley was finishing her 4th mentoring session with new recruits. She had volunteered to lead them, not as an expert, but as someone who had failed publicly, painfully, and chosen to return anyway. Her final words to the group were simple. "I'm not here to teach you how to serve drinks. I'm here to teach you how to see people." Nina Patel's blog had been picked up by a major publication and optioned for a short documentary. She had turned down the money. Instead, she asked them to fund a scholarship for aspiring women of color entering the aviation field. And they had. Miles Okoro had started a diversity initiative inside his own company, using what he learned from Celeste not as a marketing gimmick, but as the foundation for what he called ethical leadership by design. The ripples kept moving, because justice, once awakened, does not sleep again. A week later, on a crisp morning, Celeste boarded a flight not as CEO, not for inspection, but as a regular passenger. Seat 3C, window view. A young black girl sat beside her, maybe 11 or 12 years old, bouncing her feet. Celeste smiled, excited to fly. The girl nodded. "I want to be a pilot one day." Celeste's eyes twinkled. "You will be. How do you know?" "Because the sky remembers," Celeste said, "and it's waiting for you." The girl beamed. The flight took off, and Celeste looked out over the clouds, and for the first time in a long time, she felt not just peace, she felt belonging. The sky was vast, but this seat, this story, was hers, and no one would ever take it from her again. What began with one slap ended in a transformation far beyond the cabin walls. Celeste Vaughn could have sued, she could have retaliated with fury, but instead she led with integrity. She held a mirror to the systems that quietly harm people every day, and asked the world to look closer. This story reminds us racism isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers through assumptions, policies, and silence, but it always leaves a mark. Amber Huxley didn't just lose control. She lost sight of someone's humanity. And yet, through accountability, even she found a path back to herself. Through courage, leadership, and grace, Celeste didn't just reclaim her seat. She reclaimed the skies for every passenger who's ever been made to feel lesser. Let this story sit with you. Let it stir something. Because the sky remembers every act, especially the ones that choose justice over ego. If this moved you, share. And subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us tell more stories that expose injustice, celebrate resilience, and shine a light where others look away. And remember, the next time you fly, ask yourself not just where you're going, but who you're flying beside. Because dignity should never be up for debate. See you in the next story.